So the M2 MacBook Air just arrived on the front doorstep, and I haven't been this excited to unbox a laptop since that famous day in 2008 when Steve Jobs pulled out that manila folder and the original MacBook Air was announced, because that was the first time in a very long time that the laptop was kind of reimagined.
This is the new MacBook Air, and you can get a feel for how thin it is.
And even though the MacBook Air was kind of refreshed in 2018, it kind of just adopted the MacBook Pro lineup in terms of the aesthetic and the build quality and things like that. But for the most part, the design didn't really change. Yes, we got the Retina display. Yes, it was a little bit smoother, a little nicer, cooler to the touch. But this is the first time in pretty much 14 years that Apple totally changed up the MacBook Air lineup, because it's now completely different. Apple decided to do away with that wedge design, make everything a lot more squared off to match the MacBook Pro lineup. They also brought back Magsafe, which is probably my favorite form of charging ever of all time, because you never have to worry about your laptop getting pulled down to the ground if you trip over a cable. But without further ado, let's unbox this new MacBook Air. This is the baseline model, 8GB of RAM, 256GB of storage. We will be getting a 16GB of RAM storage model in the studio here soon, so definitely stay subscribed if you guys do want to check out a review or some comparisons along those sides. And we also got that new midnight color, which is hopefully as good as it looks in other videos and all the images that Apple has shown us. But here it is, the M2 MacBook Air unboxing and first impressions. Let's talk about it. So here we have it, everybody. We have the M2 MacBook Air, and now this is the absolute baseline model. But we're gonna open this up, and this is still in that UPS packaging, and you can see that it's actually new. This is a new little unboxing experience, I guess you would call it. If we just rip this from the middle and see exactly what we have in store. Let's see how this opens. You gotta love Apple's packaging. I mean, they think of everything. Got a little dust on there, but here we have the MacBook Air box. And here is the box in all her glory. And if you guys can see, the first thing that you notice, obviously, compared to all the older MacBooks, is normally we have the whole front and like a kind of like a face-down view of the actual laptop, but now we have a side profile, and you can really see how thin this thing is going to be. But you can see that this is the absolute base model, 8GB of RAM, 256GB of storage. We actually ordered another one with 16GB of RAM, because that's probably the one that we're going to keep around, just because I wanted to future-proof myself a little bit. But in classic Apple unboxing, we're opening it up. There's something about getting a new Apple product that's kind of different than everything else. You know, it's kind of premium, it's a luxury device. It's almost like, you know, you went to like Gucci or Louis or something to get a pair of shoes. So let's crack this open. And here we have the actual MacBook. We're gonna put this off to the side, see what else we have. Ooh, this is kind of heavy actually. So this is actually my first foray into the new MagSafe kind of charging situation. I know that they had MagSafe for forever and they brought it back, but this cable is really, really nice. It's nice and braided, so I really like that. It seems long enough. I don't know exactly how long it is, so that's always cool. This is kind of weird. I don't know why this tip is in white. They should have just blacked it out or midnighted it out, because I know that this is kind of like a dark, dark blue color. And then you have your paperwork. Let's see what color stickers we get. If we do get, we better get some stickers in here. Ooh. So we do get some stickers in the box, and this is kind of, again, that midnight color that Apple is touting, which isn't really black. You can see it has like a blue shimmer to it, but we're definitely gonna keep those. And then this is the 35-watt brick, I believe, the single one. I opted out of that dual one because I have another one which I'm going to show you guys at some point that actually is like half the price and exactly the same thing, but that's a small little brick that you get. It'll probably never get used. I'll probably just end up using either this, or normally I have it plugged into a monitor right here with USB-C, which means it'll always charge, but that's what we got. So now let's open up this guy. So let's unwrap this thing, and for comparison's sake, I do have, this is the M1 MacBook Air, same model, so baseline, 8GB of RAM, 256GB of storage. And it's funny, you know, we still have the same kind of specs on this one. The only difference is the M2, and then obviously the new chassis and the new redesign. And I think there's a couple other things that we'll go over in a full-length review and comparison. But essentially, what you're doing is you're paying $200 extra for that M2 chip and the new redesign, which for some people it's worth it, for others not really. But I fall under that camp that it's 100% worth it. Whoa, look at this thing. Okay, so it has kind of like a space gray vibe on camera, especially when the light hits it. But in dark, you can kind of see, so this is natural light hitting it, so it's got kind of like a blue hue, and then this is a ring light hitting it, more of a reddish color, so you can see that it does have like a space gray view. So these are the two MacBook Airs, 2 years separating them, and you can see them side by side. So this is the space gray version, and you can see that this is much, much darker, obviously. And then from a footprint standpoint, they look kind of identical. So if I kind of stack it over each other, line them up perfectly, you know, they are pretty much the same footprint. This actually extends a tiny bit farther, I can feel it, but overall, it's the same exact footprint. And from a side profile view, obviously you can see that you have the wedge design on the older model, and with the new model, you have that kind of like squared off, straighter design. So you can see at the actual back end that it's actually a tiny bit thinner than the actual MacBook Air, but obviously the wedge is going to be way thinner because it's not squared off, and that's kind of what Apple does. But in terms of actual thickness, so on the bottom side of it, you can see that it's pretty much the same thing, just a little bit different. So the actual like little pegs here are more circular. It's more circular, more flat to again accommodate the fact that we don't have that kind of little wedge design anymore. This is just a mop stand that I like to have. I'll probably just move this over to here at some point, but we'll see how that goes because these little pegs are a little bit more rounded off. So you can actually see that there's actually less screws. There's only 4 screws on this one, and I think there's 8 to 10 screws on the back of this one. Some other little subtle differences that I wanted to point out. And then from an overall weight standpoint, now that I'm holding them both like next to each other, this one actually feels a little bit lighter. I don't know why when I first picked it up, it felt a little heavier. And this one, I don't know, maybe it feels a little bit heavier because of that moff stand that I have on the back of it. But you can see these are the differences. They're pretty much the same thing, just a little bit different in size and color. So now let's open this thing up. So this video isn't going to be a full review. Stay subscribed for a full review later on, an in-depth review, because we will be comparing that M2 chip to the M1 MacBook Air and that M1 lineup of computers. But I did want to go ahead and set it up really quickly, and again, kudos to Apple for making everything so easy. Just sign into your Apple ID and then everything just gets auto-populated, especially if you are an iCloud user, which is where I put pretty much all of my files. So getting it set up was very, very simple. And then what I wanted to do was actually see exactly how much bigger the screen was. And you can see with those bezel differences that it is a pretty big screen. It's 13.6 inches. Like I said, the footprint didn't change much, if at all. So being able to fit a larger screen on there is absolutely amazing. And one thing that I did notice is that Apple's computers have always been squared off. So every corner is a right angle. But with the new MacBook Airs, and I don't know if it's the same way with the new MacBook Pros, but with this particular MacBook Air, on the top corners, the top right and the top left, it's actually rounded off very similar to an iPad. Versus on the bottom, it's actually squared off, just like the MacBook Airs of old and the older computers before that. So it's kind of squared off on the bottom and then rounded off at the top, which I really don't mind. And this is also my first experience with that notch. So that notch is pretty large, and it is kind of disappointing that they weren't able to fit Face ID in there. Because again, I didn't review the MacBook Pros because I am more of an iPad Pro user. My iPad Pro is my main computer, and the MacBook Air is just for those tasks where I need to have just a little bit more going on, especially with that secondary display behind me. But now with Stage Manager, it's kind of up in the air. But again, with this little notch on the actual MacBook Air, it is pretty big, but you pretty quickly and immediately forget about it, especially if you have a darker wallpaper, and especially if you're in dark mode a lot of the time. So you'll easily get used to it. I've been playing with it for about 5-6 hours, and it's already kind of disappeared from my mind. But it's a great segue into the webcam itself. I did want to show off the webcam quality because it is 1080p. They finally brought that over to the MacBook Airs from the MacBook Pros. No longer do we have that 720p. And Miles actually has a great video going over how to use continuity, to use your iPhone as your webcam, which I think is an amazing feature that Apple brought, and that can really only be done with Apple's little walled garden. So if you're in the Apple ecosystem, that continuity feature to be able to use your iPhone as your webcam is going to be a game changer. So I'll link that video down below if you guys do want to check that out. And then the very final thing that I wanted to touch on with my initial impressions was the actual speaker quality, because if you guys notice, with the M1 MacBook Air, the speaker grills are actually on the right and left side of the keyboard, and then with the M2 MacBook Air, the speaker grills aren't there. The speakers are actually behind or in between in the hinge, and it does fire downwards, I believe, but you can see that the sound is a little bit more full, so you get a little bit more sound, a little bit more loudness, for lack of a better term. But it's not going to be an absolute game changer. Like if you're happy with the M1 MacBook Air speaker quality, then you're going to be a little bit happier with the M2 one. But overall, it is a better speaker, just nothing crazy, and I wouldn't go out and get the M2 just for the speaker quality. And then one final thing I did want to touch on was the keyboards itself. So the keyboards, they are the same from a technology standpoint or from a hardware standpoint in terms of the actual switches themselves. The only difference in the keyboard is twofold. So the function row key, so the function key row is actually a full-size key compared to the M1 MacBook Air. The M1 MacBook Air had those like half-size keys to fit into that chassis, and I'm pretty sure they did that to fit in those speaker grills. But on the M2 MacBook Air, they're actually full-size keys, and then you can also see that they got the next-gen Touch ID in there. So the Touch ID sensor looks a little bit different, but still very, very responsive. I mean, the M1 MacBook Air Touch ID was very responsive, so the M2 one better be responsive as well. But overall, that is the main differences that you see from a visual standpoint. So you have the color, you have the squared off chassis, the new redesign, the new keyboard, the speaker grills have been moved, and then obviously you have that new notch, which Apple is kind of making it part of their design language. So whenever you see like a PNG silhouette image online, now you have it on the iPhone. You don't have it on the iPads, but I wouldn't be surprised if Apple with the 2022 iPad Pro kind of does the same thing where they do have a notch but make the bezels a little bit slimmer. But it might be coming to the iPad Pro, and now it's on pretty much every single laptop besides that M2 MacBook Pro, which has no business being in the lineup. So that's pretty much going to do for this video, everybody. Like you saw, this M2 MacBook Air is pretty astonishing. The color is beautiful. It's got that like blue tint depending on how you hold it, what kind of lighting you're in. It's a lot darker in darker situations. It's not as bad of a fingerprint magnet as people originally said it was. The new keyboard layout is awesome. The new fingerprint scanner, because I'm so used to the old iteration of the fingerprint scanner. And like I said, this is my first time back into that Magsafe ecosystem, which I absolutely love. Except for the fact that Apple decided to keep the tip on the USB-C side. They decided to keep it in that like white color for some reason. No idea why they did that. But with my short time with the device and my first impressions, overall, I think it's worth the upgrade. It's an extra $200 to go from the M1 to the M2. You get a brand new way of charging with MagSafe. You get the brand new design language. You get 13.6 inches of screen real estate versus I think the 12.9 or 13 inches that we were so used to having on the regular MacBook Pro and the M1 MacBook Air. Now, if you're coming from the M1 MacBook Air to the M2, unless you really, really want the new design and you're yearning to get the MagSafe charging capabilities, then maybe hold off just from a performance standpoint, because yes, the M2 is more powerful. It gives you about 40% more GPU performance, 20% more CPU performance, so it really depends on what you're using it for. And if you're running applications that are very task intensive, then maybe you should go to the MacBook Pro lineup and the M1 Pro, the M1 Max, the M1 Ultra. But for an everyday computer, if you aren't coming from the M1 and you're just looking to upgrade from an older computer, especially an Intel version of MacBook, then this computer, you're going to absolutely love it from a design standpoint, from a usability standpoint, from a familiarity standpoint. There isn't much that I can say negatively about this laptop, and that's why this thing is absolutely amazing. It's so thin. I love the design language, the new squared off design. Apple's kind of going backwards in terms of their design language, going back to the iPhone 5 days, the extra port days. But like I mentioned earlier, stay subscribed because we're going to be doing a lot of testing on this MacBook Air with comparisons to the M1 MacBooks, comparison to the M1 Pro and M1 Max and M1 Ultra, all things along those lines to help you guys make an educated purchasing decision when actually deciding to get a laptop like this. But that's going to do for this video. If you guys did make it to the very end, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so I know that you made it to the end. And let me know what you guys think about this new setup. But if you want to find out some more stuff about macOS, iPadOS, iOS, and all the new products that are coming from a hardware and software perspective, click on one of these videos right here. Thanks so much, and until next time, I'm out of here.